Every time you see a car with 4 interlocking rings on its bonnet, most people just think Audi, premium, German, refined. But here's what almost nobody tells you. Those 4 rings aren't a design choice. They're a burial marker. Each ring represents a company that no longer exists. 4 brands, forced together in desperation, and only the ghost of one of them survived long enough to become what you know today. This is the story of DKW, a brand that was once the largest motorcycle manufacturer on the planet. A brand that, by the late 1930s, held nearly 18% of the entire German domestic car market. And a brand that was bought, quietly dismantled, and used as the raw material to build something else entirely, a brand whose name was simply erased. You already know the ending. The name on the car today is Audi. But the body that Audi was built from, that was DKW's. And the people who made that decision never publicly celebrated it. They just did it and moved on. Pay attention to this next part, because this is where it gets genuinely strange. The man who started DKW wasn't even German. He was a Dane. His name was Jürgen Skafte Rasmussen, an engineer from Denmark who moved to Germany in 1904 and set up a small metal goods factory in a Saxon mountain town called Zschopau in 1916. At the time, Germany was in the middle of the First World War. Fuel was scarce, petrol was rationed. So Rasmussen had an idea: build a car that ran on steam. He called it the Dampfkraftwagen, the steam-powered vehicle. And from those 4 German words came the initials, DKW. The steam car failed, completely. It never got past the prototype phase, but that name, DKW, stuck, and Rasmussen was too stubborn, or too clever, to waste it. In 1919, he built something completely different, a tiny 2-stroke engine just 40 cubic centimeters designed not for a car, but as a toy. A novelty engine for the children of well-to-do German families. He called it Des Knabenwunsch, the boy's wish. It ran beautifully. It sold well. And more importantly, it showed Rasmussen that small, simple 2-stroke technology had a future. He scaled it up, bolted a modified version onto a bicycle frame, called it Das Klein Wunder, the Little Wonder. And just like that, in the early 1920s, DKW entered the motorcycle business. What happened next is one of those stories that sounds almost too clean to be true, but the numbers back it up. Within a decade, DKW had become the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. Not just in Germany, not just in Europe, in the world. By the late 1920s, the name Rasmussen had built from a failed steam experiment was producing motorcycles faster than anyone else on Earth. And that was only the beginning. In 1928, DKW launched its first car, the Tip P, small, basic, built for the working man. Then, in 1931, came the F-Series. The F stood for front-wheel drive. At a time when front-wheel drive was genuinely radical, DKW was already doing it. These weren't expensive machines for rich men. They were accessible, clever, and practical, and the market responded accordingly. But the world was about to turn very dark, very fast, and what came next would change everything. By the time the Great Depression hit in the early 1930s, Germany's industrial sector was in freefall. Banks were calling in loans. Companies were bleeding. The Saxon State Bank, which had exposure across the entire regional automotive industry, looked at its books and made a decision. A forced one. On the 29th of June, 1932, 4 German car and motorcycle manufacturers were merged into a single company, forced together, not by strategy, but by financial survival. The 4 companies were DKW, Audi, Horch, and Wanderer. Together, they became Auto Union AG, headquartered in Chemnitz, Saxony. And to represent the union, they chose a logo of 4 interlocking rings, one for each brand. Now here is the detail that history tends to gloss over. At the time of this merger, Audi was not the powerhouse. Audi was the smallest, the weakest, the most marginal of the 4. By 1938, DKW held close to 18% of the German domestic car market. Audi, 0.1%. Not a typo, 0.1. DKW was the engine of Auto Union literally and figuratively. It served the mass market. It paid the bills. While Horch made luxury cars for the wealthy and Wanderer served the upper middle segment, DKW was the one ordinary Germans were actually buying and riding. And yet, it is Audi's name that survived. And then there were the racing cars. Auto Union's silver racing machines from the mid to late 1930s are legendary. Those rear-engined, supercharged monsters that competed against Mercedes on the Grand Prix circuits of Europe, they carried the Auto Union name and were built at the Horch factory in Zwickau. They were extraordinary pieces of engineering, but they were racing in a world that was rapidly darkening. By 1939, the racing stopped. Europe was at war. The Second World War didn't just pause the Auto Union story. It nearly ended it entirely. The factories were damaged by Allied bombing campaigns. And when the war ended in 1945, what remained of the Auto Union infrastructure sat almost entirely within the Soviet occupation zone, what would become East Germany. This is the part that nobody dwells on long enough. Think about what that actually meant. The executives, the engineers, the managers of Auto Union, they were on the western side of a line that was being drawn across their country in real time. The Red Army was advancing on Zwickau, and the decision had to be made almost instantly: leave or be absorbed. They left. They fled west with virtually nothing, no factories, no tooling, no equipment, just the knowledge in their heads and whatever paperwork they could carry. The Soviets stripped what remained. The factories that had built DKW motorcycles and Auto Union racing cars were dismantled for reparations. What was left was handed over to East Germany's state apparatus. And those facilities built by Rasmussen, built by DKW, were eventually used to produce something that became a symbol of communist-era misery. The Trabant. Wrap your head around that for a moment. The same factories, the same basic engineering DNA, the same two-stroke lineage that DKW had pioneered ended up powering the Trabant, the little plastic-bodied car that East Germans waited years to buy and that the rest of the world spent decades laughing at. DKW's legacy, twisted by circumstance and ideology, into something almost unrecognizable. But that's not where the story ends. On the 3rd of September, 1949, a new company was quietly registered in Ingolstadt, Bavaria. It was called Auto Union GmbH. Built from scratch, with loans and determination, and a handful of engineers who had fled west 4 years earlier, they had no factories to speak of. They started production using a refurbished plant that had belonged to Rheinmetall Borsig in Düsseldorf. And the brand they chose to revive? Not Audi, which had been almost irrelevant before the war. Not Horch, which had died in 1940. Not Wanderer, gone since 1941. They chose DKW, because DKW was the one ordinary people still remembered. DKW was the name with traction. The first post-war model was the DKW F89, a small front-wheel drive saloon, continuing the tradition of the pre-war F-Series. It was modest. It was practical. It got people moving again, and it sold. Through the early and mid-1950s, DKW rebuilt its presence in the West German market, step by step. The motorcycles came back too. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, something uncomfortable was happening. The East German state had restarted production of pre-war Auto Union designs, calling them IFA cars, using DKW's own engineering. The West German Auto Union took legal action to stop them using the DKW brand. They won. The East Germans dropped the name, but they didn't drop the technology. They just renamed everything, evolved the design, and eventually produced the Trabant. The irony was complete. Now here is a piece of history that gets buried in footnotes. In April 1958, Auto Union GmbH was purchased by Daimler-Benz AG. Yes, Mercedes-Benz owned DKW for nearly 7 years. But it was not a comfortable marriage. At the engineering level, there was a fundamental conflict that could not be resolved. Daimler's engineers believed in four-stroke technology. DKW's entire identity, every car, every motorcycle, everything Rasmussen had built, was rooted in the two-stroke engine, simple, light, cheap to produce. But increasingly seen, especially by Daimler's engineers, as a dead end. Daimler began developing a four-stroke engine program for Auto Union. They wanted to modernize the product line. DKW cars continued to be built and sold. Through this period, the DKW Junior appeared in 1959, the F11 and F12 in the early 1960s. But the internal debate about the two-stroke's future was growing louder, and Daimler was losing patience. Then, in December 1964, something shifted. A man named Friedrich Karl Flick, a major West German industrialist who had orchestrated the original Daimler purchase of Auto Union, now facilitated another transaction. Volkswagen, flush with cash from selling the Beetle to the entire world, acquired the majority of shares in Auto Union GmbH. By the end of 1966, Auto Union was a fully owned Volkswagen subsidiary. And here is where the real decision was made. The decision that nobody announced at a press conference. The decision that happened in meeting rooms and engineering discussions, quietly and efficiently. Volkswagen killed the two-stroke. All work on two-stroke engine development at Auto Union came to an immediate end when VW took full control. The technology that DKW had been built on, the technology Rasmussen had developed from a toy engine in 1919, was declared finished, done, over. The last DKW model was already in development when VW arrived. It was called the F102, a handsome, modern two-door saloon. 53,000 of them were eventually built between 1963 and 1966. But even as it was being sold to customers, the engineers in Ingolstadt were already working on what came next. And what came next had nothing of DKW left in it, at least not in name. Here is the moment, the exact moment where DKW ends and Audi begins. The DKW F102, that last two-stroke model, was taken as the base. Its body was updated. Its front and rear styling were revised. And the most significant change of all, the two-stroke engine was pulled out entirely, and in its place went a four-stroke unit. Specifically, a four-cylinder, four-stroke engine that had been developed during the Daimler-Benz era, internally referred to as the medium-pressure engine. The displacement was 1.5 liters, later expanded to 1.7 and 1.8 liters in subsequent versions. The result was a car that was essentially DKW's platform with a completely different heart. And when Volkswagen looked at what to call it, they made a choice that tells you everything about what they thought of the DKW name. They didn't call it DKW, they called it Audi. Not even a model name at first, just Audi. The car, launched in September 1965, was presented simply as the Audi. The manufacturer was still officially Auto Union GmbH. But the brand on the car? Audi. A name that had represented 0.1% of the German market before the war. A name that had been dormant for decades. Now, resurrected. Because Volkswagen needed something that didn't carry the two-stroke stigma of DKW. DKW was associated, in the public mind, with that buzzy, smoky, distinctly working-class two-stroke sound. Volkswagen didn't want that. They wanted something that could be positioned higher, something with room to grow up market. And so they chose the weakest of the four Auto Union brands, the one with almost no pre-war associations left, and they gave it the car that DKW's own engineers had largely developed. If you needed proof that history is written by the survivors, there it is. Now, and this is the part that almost no one outside the automotive history community knows, the car that truly launched the modern Audi era was developed in secret. Let that sink in for a moment. When Volkswagen took over Auto Union, their initial intention was not to create a separate premium brand. They wanted the Ingolstadt factory to assemble Beetles. That was the plan. Use the capacity. Increase Beetle production. The Auto Union engineers were not supposed to be developing their own cars. But they did it anyway. A small team in Ingolstadt worked quietly on a new model, a larger, more sophisticated car than anything Auto Union had produced before. They designed it without explicit VW authorization. When it was finished, they essentially presented it to Heinz Nordhoff, the chairman of Volkswagen, almost as a fait accompli. "Here's what we built. What do you think?" Nordhoff was impressed. He approved it. That car became the Audi 100, launched in 1968, and the Audi 100 is the direct ancestor of every premium Audi you have ever seen. The A6, the A8, the entire upper end of the Audi range traces its lineage back to a car that was built without permission in a factory that was supposed to be making Beetles. If those engineers had followed orders, there would be no premium Audi brand today. There would just be more Beetles. Now subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this kind of story, the buried real history behind the cars you grew up with, is exactly what we do here. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling us which of the 4 Auto Union brands you think deserve to survive, and if this opened your eyes to something you didn't know, share it with a friend who thinks they know their car history. Let's see if they knew this. In 1969, the transformation became official, at least on paper. Auto Union GmbH merged with NSU Motorenwerke AG, another German manufacturer that Volkswagen had also acquired, to form a new company called Audi, NSU Auto Union AG. The 4 rings remained on the car. DKW's name did not appear anywhere. Then, in 1985, the company simplified its name for the last time. Audi NSU, Auto Union AG, became simply Audi AG. The Auto Union named the name that had held 4 companies together through depression, war, and reconstruction reduced to a footnote, a subsidiary, a trademark holder, a heritage operation. DKW, as a mark, had officially been gone since 1969. The last DKW badged car produced in West Germany rolled off the line in 1966. There were licensed productions in Brazil and Argentina that continued a bit longer. Brazil until 1967. Argentina until 1969, but the original was already dead before most of those cars were finished. Now think about the scale of what was lost and what was transformed in this story. Rasmussen started with a failed steam car in a Saxon mountain town during the First World War. From that failure, he built a toy engine. From that toy engine, he built the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. From those motorcycles, he built a car company that took nearly 1/5 of the German market. That company was then forced into a merger during the Depression, survived the Second World War by fleeing west with nothing, rebuilt from scratch, was sold to Mercedes, then sold to Volkswagen, and was finally dismantled piece by piece and used to construct a different brand entirely. The 4 rings that Audi wears today are not a celebration. They are a reminder. Horch dead since 1940. Wanderer dead since 1940. One for civilian vehicles. Audi nearly dead before the war, resurrected as a badge of convenience. And DKW, the one that actually kept everything alive for decades, dead since 1969. There is something deeply uncomfortable about the way this story ended. The brand that did the heavy lifting, that held the market share, that rebuilt after the war under its own name, that gave Volkswagen the platform and the factory and the engineering team they needed, that brand got its name removed and its body reused. And the brand that was an afterthought, 0.1% market share before the war, dormant for decades, that is the name on every premium German car that claims a heritage stretching back to the early days of motoring. DKW never got a monument, it never got a revival. The name exists today only in the archives of a heritage operation in Ingolstadt, carefully preserved, carefully managed, and quietly kept out of the spotlight. But here's what I want you to carry away from this story. Every car has a history, and the history on the badge is almost never the whole truth. The truth is messier, more human, more interesting than any marketing department would want you to know. Rasmussen built something real from nothing. His engineers built it again after the war. And when the corporate machinery finally came for it, it took everything they had built and gave the credit to someone else. That is how industries work. That is how history gets written. And that is exactly why stories like this one matter. If you're new here, subscribe now. We go deep on the real history behind the machines that shape the world, the stories nobody puts in the brochure. Drop a comment below. What did you already know about DKW, and what genuinely surprised you? Give this video a like if it earned it. And if you have a friend who thinks they know their automotive history, share this with them. Let's find out how much they really know. We'll see you in the next one.